Part 62. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 611. At this time, after hearing what Murong Kong said, the man in black robe just waved his hand casually, and then smiled like this. I just asked casually. If you are really confused now, you don't need to answer. But you also know what you want. On the way, your brother is very likely to become your stumbling block. I just hope that when that time comes, you won't be bothered anymore. The man in black robe stared straight at Murong Kong. The smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious, and there was quite a bit of playfulness in his eyes. At this time, when Murong Kong heard what the man in black robe said, his face condensed slightly, and then he sighed quietly. Oh, maybe, I just hope so, I just hope nothing goes wrong again. At this time, after hearing what Murong Kong said, the man in black robe just glanced at Murong Kong, and then he smiled, and the smile at the corner of his mouth changed even more. It became more and more obvious, and there was a bit of playfulness in his eyes. After Murong Kong saw the man in black robe like this, he just felt that the man in black robe was a little strange. After a while, he came back to his senses in an instant. At that time, he also understood why the man in black robe was what he was today. This way. Murong Kong just stared at the man in black robe with a smile on his face, and then shook his head. Then he just clapped his hands gently, and the smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. It's high, it's indeed high. The man in black robe heard it. After Murong Kong said this, he couldn't help but laugh loudly, and then waved his hand casually. That's all. Compared with Mr. Murong, I'm afraid there's still a huge difference. The man in black robe just said so softly, the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious, and a strange color flashed in his eyes. After waiting for a while, Murong Kong came to his senses in an instant, and then turned his head directly. I don't want to talk too much nonsense to you, but you have to remember one thing clearly. You'd better not take advantage of my brother. Even if one day you really need to get rid of my brother, it will be between me and him. What happened between us has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with you. Do you understand? The killing energy in Murong Kong's body was released without reservation at this moment, and then he took a step forward, and the cold aura pressed directly on him. Onto the man in black robe in front of him. At this time, the face of the man in black robe also darkened slightly. After a while, the man in black robe took a step forward, and then disappeared from Murong Kong's sight. Don't worry, I will fully respect your opinions and will never deviate from your opinions. In this case, I think you should also rest assured. The man in black robe just spoke softly and leisurely, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this time, Murong Kong turned his head like this, and then said it was already discovered that the man in black robe had disappeared without a trace at this time. After waiting for this moment, Murong Kong also took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. Interesting, it's really interesting. If that's the case, then I don't have anything to say. After Murong Kong finished speaking, he came back to his senses. At this time, Lin Yu also returned to Dugu's house. For some reason, Elder Dugu always felt that Lin Yu and Dugu Qinghong were hiding something from her, so as soon as Elder Dugu returned to his house, he went straight to Dugu Qinghong's room without saying a word. Elder Dugu knocked gently on Dugu Qinghong's door. At this time, Dugu Qinghong also pretended to have just gotten up, then stretched out from outside, and finally walked out slowly. Dugu Qinghong glanced at Elder Dugu, and then a bit of confusion flashed in his eyes. His expression tightened slightly, and then he smiled. Grandpa, what do you want from me? At this time, Elder Dugu's eyes were looking up and down Dugu Qinghong's body, as if he wanted to detect some clues from Dugu Qinghong's body. But Elder Dugu looked up and down Dugu King Hong's body for a long time, but he couldn't find any clues. So in the end, Elder Dugu just coughed lightly, and then waved his hand casually. Nothing, nothing, I just came to see how you, little girl, are doing now. Now I'm relieved to find you're fine. After Dugu Qinghong heard what Elder Dugu said, she couldn't help but smile, and then her eyes were fixed on Elder Dugu. The smile on the corner of her mouth was even more, it is becoming more and more obvious. Grandpa, when I see you like this, I know that things are not what you said. At this time, Dugu Qinghong's eyes were fixed on Elder Dugu. Elder Dugu's face turned red, and then he coughed softly, and then shook his hands. Ahem, no, no, Grandpa, don't make fun of me. After Dugu Qinghong finished speaking, he rolled his eyes at Elder Dugu, and then spoke softly, with a bit of tenderness in his eyes and eyebrows. At this time, Elder Dugu was shocked when he saw Dugu Qinghong like this, and then he said in a serious voice, "Little girl, why do you feel that you are a little different today and yesterday?" At this time, after hearing what Elder Dugu said, Dugu Qinghong's heart was in his throat, and then his heart couldn't help but suddenly skipped a beat. Haha, is that so? I don't think so. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 612. At this time, Elder Dugu's eyes were looking back and forth on Dugu Qinghong's body, and his eyes were quite solemn. After pondering for a moment, the others shook their heads slightly, and then took a deep breath. No, absolutely not. There must be something wrong with you. I can clearly feel that there is indeed something different between you now and yesterday. Although I can't tell what the difference is, there must be something wrong. After Dugu Qinghong saw Elder Dugu like this, he was speechless for a while. At this time, 3 black lines appeared on his forehead, and then he looked towards Lin Yu as if asking for help. Take a look. At this time, Lin Yu could be said to be too busy taking care of himself. Naturally, he had no way to take care of Dugu Qinghong, so at this time, Lin Yu just waved his hand casually. After Dugu Qinghong saw Lin Yu like this, 3 black lines appeared on his forehead, and then he glared at Lin Yu fiercely. Elder Dugu felt a little uncomfortable when he saw Dugu Qinghong and Lin Yu flirting with each other like this, so at this time he just coughed slightly, and then whispered like this. Ahem, are you still like this in front of me? At this time, Du Buletin Qinghong and Lin Yu, after hearing Elder Dugu's words, they did not dare to continue at that time. They just scratched their heads and smiled in embarrassment. After Elder Dugu saw the two of them like this, he couldn't help laughing. At this time, Elder Dugu looked like an old naughty boy, and he looked extremely interesting. After a while, Elder Dugu also took a deep breath and calmed down his mood a little. Oh, forget it, you young people have secrets between you young people. I can't say much, but you must pay attention to some things and don't go too far. Lin Yu, I think you should know what I mean, right? After Elder Dugu finished speaking, he turned his head, glanced at Lin Yu, and then spoke in a deep voice. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Elder Dugu said, he scratched his head and smiled. Finally, he nodded solemnly, don't worry, Elder, I can definitely grasp the sense of proportion in this live. Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on Elder Dugu, and there seemed to be some complexity in his eyes. At this time, Elder Dugu also laughed loudly, and then nodded with satisfaction. Not bad, as long as you know what's going on. After Elder Dugu finished speaking, he turned around and left. At this time, Lin Yu and Dugu Qinghong were relieved after seeing Elder Dugu leave. Dugu Qinghong retreated like this and came to Lin Yu's side. Then she immediately found the soft flesh on Lin Yu's waist and suddenly grabbed the soft flesh on Lin Yu's waist. Then, like this, a 360-degree turn came directly. At this time, Lin Yu couldn't help but take a breath of cold air. This little girl, Dugu Qinghong, was indeed very fierce. At this time, De Guqinghong stared at Lin Yu with a smile on his face, and then asked softly, "Does it hurt?" At this time, Lin Yu dared not say it hurt. He just shook his head, and then forced a smile on his lips. "No, it doesn't hurt." At this time, De Guqinghong suddenly smiled after hearing what Lin Yu said, and then turned her head and glanced at Lin Yu. "Is it true that it doesn't hurt, or is it just pretending that it doesn't hurt?" At this time, Lin Yu was on the verge of crying for a while, just begging this ant to feel better quickly. At this time, he took a deep breath, and then said softly, "With. Of course it really doesn't hurt anymore. How could I lie to you?" At this time, De Guqinghong nodded with satisfaction, and then immediately let go of Lin Yu. However, De Guqinghong's face looked completely aggrieved at this moment, and she just glanced at him faintly. Lin Yu glanced at her. "Although you don't feel any pain, I am in great pain." De Guqinghong's face was full of resentment. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he quickly hugged De Guqinghong. At this time, De Guqinghong pushed Lin Yu away, and then looked around with a guilty conscience, his eyes full of fear. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly smiled when he saw De Guqinghong looking so cute. After De Guqinghong saw Lin Yu smiling, his face instantly turned gloomy, and then he slowly walked towards Lin Yu. "Is it funny? Is it funny?" De Guqinghong stared at Lin Yu with his eyes fixed, and then he said this with almost gritted teeth. At this time, Lin Yu didn't dare to say anything more. He only dared to shake his head desperately. "It's not funny, it's not funny at all." Even though he is a beast master with several realms of gods, he still looks like this in front of his wife. At this time, De Guqinghong nodded in satisfaction. At this time, Lin Yu also slapped his forehead suddenly. "By the way, Elder De Gu seemed to ask me to report today. How could I forget this matter? If the new students are late for reporting, it will be really bad." After hearing what Lin Yu said, De Guqinghong turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu, and then casually shook his hands. "You don't have to be so anxious at all. Don't you think about it? My grandfather is still at home now. What's the use even if those guys go? Aren't they all waiting there? Not only that, they know my grandfather too well now, and those guys are all problem youths like you, so they will definitely not come now," De Guqinghong said slowly. At this time, Lin Yu heard De Guqinghong say this, and then he coughed lightly, and his face was also a little surprised. "Are you serious? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 613. De Guqinghong glared at Lin Yu angrily, and then said in a deep voice, "Do you suspect that I am lying to you? You bastard, if you don't believe it, then forget it." At this time, Lin Yu didn't dare to say that he didn't believe it. He just grabbed De Guqinghong and said with a smile on his face, "Believe it, of course I believe it. How can I not believe what my wife said?" After hearing Lin Yu's flattery, De Guqinghong was extremely pleased. At this time, she just coughed slightly, and then nodded with satisfaction. "That's more like it. Under normal circumstances, there will indeed be a madman there nowadays, but you don't have to pay attention to that madman, and of course they won't pay attention to you either." After Lin Yu heard what De Guqinghong said, he was stunned for an instant. He turned his head and glanced at De Guqinghong, and then just coughed slightly. "One time. Ahem, Qinghong, what do you mean? Why don't I quite understand?" After De Guqinghong heard what Lin Yu said, he shook his head and smiled like this, "Oh, there is really nothing we can do against you. In fact, that madman is not a madman in the true sense, but a cultivator. A madman is just obsessed with cultivation and has no interest in ordinary things at all. Lin Yu nodded his head in the same way and they nodded gently, then glanced at Tugu Qinghong and whispered, "Why don't you tell me about the situation in that class?" Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on Tugu Qinghong, and there was quite a bit of pleading in his eyes. At this time, 3 black lines appeared on Tugu Qinghong's forehead. It was the same at that time and he just coughed slightly. "Ahem, there is no problem in helping you, but this is a benefit." At this time, Lin Yu also smiled when he heard what Tugu Qinghong said, and then nodded heavily. "The benefits of this will definitely not be a mistreatment of my wife, how about that?" Tugu Qinghong heard Lin Yu, and after saying this, he nodded with satisfaction, and then spoke softly. "Actually, everyone in my grandfather's class is an extremely evil being. Each of them has his or her own specialties, and their specialties are almost kept secret throughout the academy. Even my grandfather rarely mentioned them to me. The specialty of these people is that some of them have 2 obvious personalities, so I know about them. As for those who are very low-key, I don't know what they know and what they don't know at all. What they do in daily life what?" After Tugu Qinghong finished speaking, Lin Yu just nodded slightly. "What else?" "Let me tell you a few guys with obvious personalities." Lin Yu and Tugu Qinghong were chatting like this. Tugu Qinghong told Lin Yu that there was a man with red hair, whom others called Lei Yan. This guy was indeed ruthless. It was said that when he first entered school, he grabbed a third-year student and beat him violently. There was no other reason than that he saw that third-year student cutting in line in front, and the person cutting in was not in his team, so the other guys were caught out by this guy and beaten up. That guy did have some background, and he also joined an intermediate club in the college. The leader of that intermediate club was also somewhat prestigious in the 3rd grade, and the body-protecting beast on his body was from the realm of chaos. But even so, this guy named Lei Yan still had a very tough attitude after the boss came to the door. The boss originally thought that Lei Yan was a talent that could be made, and even wanted to win over him, as long as Lei Yan relaxed a little. Relenting, the boss also decided not to embarrass Lei Yan anymore. But who knew that Lei Yan had such a bad temper? No matter what the boss said, Lei Yan remained unmoved. In the end, even the boss became a little angry, so Hu Bian issued an order to make all the people in the club take turns to find Lei Yan for a fight. There is a rule in this college that everyone can only fight once a day. This is of course to protect the students from being bullied by those who have good intentions in this college. The boss ordered his men to fight desperately. Lei Yan was not a vegetarian. The boss sent out people from his club for 30 days in a row, and every day those people basically came back with prizes. In the end, the boss saw that there was really no one available and no one to send, so he went into battle himself. After the boss went into battle in person, it was still Bai Leiyan who defeated him. The Thunder Beast was the Thunder Beast inherited from the Lei family. This Thunder Beast could control thunder, lightning, and flames. It was powerful and domineering. Naturally, it was not those of Xiao Xiao. "Disciple, you can deal with it at will." After this battle, Lei Yan's reputation became so great that everyone in the entire college knew about this red-haired guy. Moreover, this guy had an unusually bad temper. He often had conflicts with his classmates in Elder Tugu's class. If they don't agree, they will ask for a fight, but Lei Yan's level can only be regarded as the bottom in Elder Tugu's class. Over time, Lei Yan also realized this, knowing that these people in his class were all perverts, so he stopped provoking people in his class. If there was any unhappiness in his class, he would take the opportunity to find some people who deliberately made trouble. However, this guy Lei Yan also has advantages. That is, when Lei Yan is in a bad mood, he will go out to do justice, so those things that bully classmates and collect protection fees are basically no longer dared to do. After all, Lei Yan's favorite thing is to stay in the blind spots of the school surveillance, waiting for those senior students to ask for protection fees from the junior students, or bully the junior students. Once these things are caught by Lei Yan, they will be beaten violently. Over time, there is a legend in the entire Battle Academy, that is, when everyone sees Lei Yan appear from the blind spot of the surveillance, they know that this grandson must have encountered something unpleasant in the class. At first, the elders and the principal of the college were extremely troubled by this matter, but after it achieved positive results, the elders and the principal of the college turned a blind eye to it. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 614. When Lin Yu heard what Zhuge Qinghong said, he nodded slightly and smiled. A bit of perfection flashed in his eyes, and then he gently groped his chin. I don't know what this guy is thinking at this time. At this time, Zhuge Qinghong turned his head, glanced at Lin Yu, and then said in a low voice, "What on earth are you thinking about? Why do I always have a bad feeling?" Zhuge Qinghong just turned his head, stared directly at Lin Yu, and then whispered like this. At this time, after hearing what Zhuge Qinghong said, Lin Yu felt like crying for a while, and then looked at Zhuge Qinghong with an aggrieved face. "Who do you think I am? My expression is normal now, okay?" Zhuge Qinghong looked at Lin Yu's aggressive gaze, then spat softly, and then said angrily. "Actually, the only one who likes to cause trouble the most is Lei Yan. As for the rest of you, although your temper is a bit weird, I understand your character and you are not the kind of person who causes trouble at will, so I'm not worried at all." At this time, Zhuge Qinghong was speaking softly, and at this time, Lin Yu turned his head and stared at Zhuge Qinghong with a smile on his face, and the smile at the corner of his mouth was becoming more and more obvious. After Zhuge Qinghong saw this scene, she just felt that Lin Yu was a little strange at this time, and suddenly had a bad premonition in her heart, so she turned her head and glanced at Lin Yu. "I told you not to be too showy and high profile after you get to the class. There are people outside the world, and there is a sky outside the world. In that class, basically everyone has been promoted to the realm of chaos, and some have even become abnormal. There is more than one guardian beast. Although the beast you carry is very likely to enter the realm of gods, it has not yet entered the realm of gods, so you still have to be careful." Zhuge Qinghong warned Lin Yu in a low voice. At this time, after hearing what Zhuge Qinghong said, Lin Yu just smiled like this. There was quite a bit of playfulness in his eyes, and he obviously did not take Zhuge Qinghong seriously. Qinghong took these words to heart. At this moment, Zhuge Qinghong was speechless after seeing Lin Yu like this. She raised her wrist and glanced at her watch. "Okay, the first class is almost over. Now Grandpa should set off. Those classmates should be arriving soon," Zhuge Qinghong said softly. After Lin Yu heard what Zhuge Qinghong said, he nodded slightly, and then Zhuge Qinghong and Lin Yu rushed towards the Battle Academy at the same time. While on the road, Lin Yu thought a lot. For example, one of the strangest things nowadays is probably that Gaia, the mother of the earth, has no movement at all. Even the eternal thunder dragon felt that this matter seemed a bit weird. In fact, Lin Yu was lost in thought just now because of this incident. Zhuge Qinghong saw Lin Yu walking blankly like this, his expression a little dull, and he just thought that Lin Yu might be a little nervous, so he comforted her softly. "Actually, you don't need to be nervous. After all, you have been in contact with Grandpa these days. In fact, in Grandpa's class, all the classmates are really easy to deal with. The most difficult person to deal with is probably Grandpa." Zhuge Qinghong also said helplessly at this moment. At this moment, Zhuge Qinghong heard a cough coming from behind him. At this time, after Zhuge Qinghong heard the cough, he immediately turned his head, and then he saw Mr. Zhuge standing behind him. After Zhuge Qinghong saw this scene, he couldn't help but smile, and then he scratched his head in embarrassment. "Grandpa, why are you here?" At this time, Dugu Qinghong turned her head and glanced at Elder Dugu, but the smile on her face was full of helplessness. Elder Dugu just shook his head, and then sighed leisurely, with a look of helplessness on his face. Oh, it turns out that the girl didn't get admitted to the university. Anyway, it's really sad that I, an old man, have such bad feelings in my own granddaughter's heart. Elder Dugu said helplessly like this, and then in the corners of his eyes and brows, there was a complete sense of helplessness. At this time, after Dugu Qinghong heard what Elder Dugu said, he quickly waved his hands and shook his head, and then said softly, "It's not like this, it's not like this, Grandpa, what are you thinking? Grandpa, you will always be my best grandpa." Dugu Qinghong slowly walked to Elder Dugu, and then spoke softly. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he was also a god who had returned home. He glanced at Elder Dugu, and then smiled like this. "Sorry, I was a little distracted just now." Elder Dugu just waved his hand casually, then turned his head, glanced at Lin Yu, and then spoke softly. "Actually, you don't have to be like this at all. You don't have to be nervous if anything happens. In fact, your classmates are all easy to get along with. Don't listen to this little girl's nonsense." Elder Dugu just said this unhurriedly, and then stared straight at Lin Yu. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Elder Dugu said, he nodded slightly, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. "I see." Elder Dugu just patted Lin Yu's shoulder gently. "It's good to understand, but it can be said that there is a crouching tiger, hidden dragon in that class. When the time comes, you must be more careful when you enter. The situation is best. Keep a low profile. Qinghong must have told you about the guy named Lei Yan. That guy is usually very flamboyant and acts too high profile. He is often beaten in the class. It's very miserable." After Elder Dugu said this, he even couldn't help laughing, looking quite gloating about his misfortune. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 615. At this time, after Lin Yu and Dugu Qinghong saw Elder Dugu like this, 3 black lines suddenly appeared on their foreheads, and they were speechless for a while. At this time, Dugu Qinghong coughed lightly. There was a sound. "Ahem, Grandpa, is it really okay for you to gloat about others' misfortunes like this? It's almost time to arrive at school. If you continue to gloat over others' misfortunes like this, you might have to notify the principal again if someone sees you." Then, at this time, Elder Dugu heard what he said. After Dugu Qinghong said this, he also came back to his senses. Then at this moment, he quietly approached like this, with a serious look. At this moment, Elder Dugu doesn't have the slightest bit of cynicism from before. Even Lin Yu felt a little strange after seeing this scene. Lin Yu turned his head and glanced at Dugu Qinghong, and then asked in a low voice, "Who is the principal?" At this time, Dugu Qinghong heard Lin Yu. After saying this, he just looked at Lin Yu with a smile on his face, and then waved his hand casually. "One thing is better than the other, add some brine and some tofu, and you will be able to eat my grandfather to death." At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Dugu Qinghong said, he nodded slightly, and then smiled like this. Just after they entered the school, Lin Yu saw a beautiful woman with a curvy figure and extremely tall figure standing at the door. That beauty was extremely beautiful, with breakable skin on her face, and her facial features were so delicate that it made people look like they were holding her in their arms, loving her. At this time, Lin Yu saw her. After this scene, my eyes couldn't help but look straight. After Dugu Qinghong saw this scene, she couldn't help but snorted, and then she raised her leg and stepped hard on Lin Yu's foot. It was obvious that Dugu Qinghong, the little girl, was really jealous. At this time, Lin Yu turned around and glanced at Dugu Qinghong, his eyes full of pity. Dugu Qinghong just glared at Lin Yu fiercely, and then walked straight ahead. After Elder Dugu saw this woman, He originally looked relaxed and held his breath at this moment, as if he was a primary school student who was listening carefully to the teacher's lecture. After everyone saw this scene, they couldn't help but feel that this reading the elders are a bit cute. Suyuyan also turned her head and glanced at Elder Dugu. The smile at the corner of her mouth became more and more obvious. At this time, Elder Dugu was as if he had fallen into ice. Because the brighter this little girl smiles, the worse she may be treated. Grandpa Dugu, I heard that the holiday is about to start. During the holiday of the college, I am going to ask you to lead the 1st to 3rd grade teams to go to the demonic forest. What do you think? At this time, after Elder Dugu heard what Suyuyan said, 3 black lines suddenly appeared on his forehead, and he was speechless for a while. At this time, he coughed lightly, and then immediately he turned his head and glanced at Suyuyan. Ahem, Yuyan, how is your grandma doing? At this time, Elder Dugu didn't even respond to Suyuyan's words at all. But at this moment, Suyuyan did not intend to let Elder Dugu go just like this. My grandma is very strong now, and she has been staying in the demonic forest these days. My grandma has her eyes on a 99th level chaos level monster, and is going to tame it to protect the strange beasts. Suyuyan just said this unhurriedly, and then as if he suddenly remembered something, he turned his head and glanced at Elder Dugu, and then he had the same expression. Staring at Elder Dugu with a smile. Grandpa Dugu, how about it? Do you think that can be done? At this time, after Elder Dugu heard what Suyuyan said, he just pondered for a moment, and then touched his chin in the same way, and then he showed a look of embarrassment. It's not that it can't be done, it's just that it may be a little difficult, so. Elder Dugu said, then he paused. At this time, after Suyuyan heard what Elder Dugu said, she nodded lightly, okay, but I heard that Grandpa Chen seemed to have led a team of people into the demon realm in order to protect my grandma. Forest, I heard that I'm going to escort my grandma. Suyuyan whispered like this, and then walked towards the front. At this time, she was still talking to herself, oh, it's just a pity that my grandma is trapped alone this time in a dangerous situation, only Grandpa Chen went to help, and no one dared to show his face. Amelia Su spoke unhurriedly. At this time, after Elder Dugu heard what Suyuyan said, he gritted his teeth as if he had made up his mind, and then took a step forward. Okay, you little girl, don't continue to act here. I'll go. Can't I just go? At this time, after Suyuyan heard Elder Dugu's promise, her expression suddenly changed. She turned her head and glanced at Elder Dugu, and then others smiled like this. I knew you would definitely go. At this time, after Elder Dugu heard what Suyuyan said, 3 black lines appeared on his forehead, and he was speechless for a while. At this time, he also knew that he must have been tricked by this little girl. Together, but now there is no other way. Today's Elder Dugu was also on the verge of crying for a while. At this time, Elder Dugu couldn't help but shook his head slightly, and then he said helplessly. Oh, how come this little girl looks so much like her grandma back then? At this time, after Elder Dugu thought of this, there was a sense of helplessness between his eyebrows. The bitter smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious, and a flash of light flashed in his eyes. Some memories. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 616. At this time, Lin Yu came to the new class under the leadership of Dugu Qinghong. You must know that Dugu Qinghong is also a campus beauty in this college, so naturally countless people covet the elder Dugu. In the class, the same is naturally true. So when someone saw Dugu Qinghong bringing a new face they didn't recognize to his class, everyone blew up the temple at the same time. At this time, their eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and then they looked up and down. They seemed to want to find something special about Lin Yu. But after their eyes scanned Lin Yu's body for a long time, they didn't find anything unusual about the man in front of them. At this moment, Lin Yu was surrounded by everyone's eyes, and he felt a little unhappy in his heart. But of course Lin Yu knew the reason for this. It was probably because Tugu Qinghong sent him here. Lin Yu stood at the door of the classroom, waiting for Elder Tugu. At this time, Elder Tugu arrived at the door of the classroom. When he saw Lin Yu standing at the door of the classroom, he smiled at Lin Yu, and then waved his hand casually. Go in first." After Lin Yu heard what Elder Tugu said, he nodded slightly, and then followed Elder Tugu and walked in. After Lin Yu and Elder Tugu walked in, everyone's eyes were filled with confusion. At this time, the guy with red hair stood up directly, and then he just glanced at Elder Tugu and Lin Yu, and then his eyes were fixed on Lin Yu. It's all a kind of contempt and disdain. "Teacher, what is it now? Can cats and dogs enter our class? This guy has no spiritual power at all, and no aura of a beast master at all. Bringing this guy into our class is simply a huge blow to our class. Insult." At this time, Elder Tugu just smiled, and then turned his head with a smile on his face and glanced at Lin Yu. "Ahem, little one, don't expect me to support you in this place. You can only rely on yourself for everything, even if others insult you." Elder Tugu just said this unhurriedly, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. People around heard this, and after Elder Tugu said this, he just pointed at Lin Yu. He cast a sympathetic look. They knew that Lin Yu might not have an easy life in the coming days. At this time, Lin Yu had a look of joy on his face after hearing what Elder Tugu said. He just glanced at Elder Tugu, and then said softly, "What you said is true." After Elder Tugu heard what Lin Yu said, he nodded slightly. "That's natural. How about it? Next, we have to watch your own performance." After Lin Yu heard what Elder Tugu said, he immediately took a step forward, and then the coercion from the red sword yellow sand beast began to show on his body. You must know that the pressure among these alien beasts is strictly controlled by blood, not because of strength. In front of high-level alien beasts, those low-level alien beasts with bloodline cannot even raise their heads. Even those with this is true no matter how powerful the alien beast is. Although the level of this red-trained yellow sand beast is not high, the purity of his bloodline is probably unmatched by anyone in the entire academy. Coupled with the pressure of the eternal thunder dragon and the fire Kylin, the three pressures superimposed together not only made it impossible for everyone to feel it, but also gave everyone a strong sense of oppression in their hearts. Even Elder Tugu couldn't help but turn slightly pale after feeling this pressure. He looked at Lin Yu as if he was looking at a monster. Lin Yu just coughed lightly, then smiled, and finally just waved his hand. "Hello everyone, my name is Lin Yu. I am your new classmate. I hope you can take care of me." Lin Yu spoke unhurriedly like this. The smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious, and there was quite a bit of playfulness in his eyes. At this moment, all the people raised their heads, their eyes fixed on Lin Yu. Their brows seemed to be twisted together. At this moment, their eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, looking at the monster in front of him. That's right, even though Lin Yu had just entered school, he was already labeled a monster by them. In this corner, a beautiful woman slowly raised her head. Although that woman was a student, her figure was extremely well developed, even compared to the current dean of the Battle Academy, Su Yuyan. Not to mention more concessions. There was a bit of coldness in the woman's face, just like an iceberg, with words written on it like "keep away from strangers." At this time, the woman's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and a special color flashed across her face. After a while, the woman suddenly smiled, and her smile became more and more obvious. After seeing this scene, everyone was shocked and stunned. because they had never seen this woman smile before. Everyone was guessing who Lin Yu was. At this moment, one of the men in light blue clothes exclaimed, "It's Lin Yu." The man's voice trembled slightly, and everyone turned their heads and looked at him. There was a kind of contempt in their eyes, as if they didn't understand why this man was so out of control. At this time, Bing Xuanjai, after seeing this scene, couldn't help but blush, and then he coughed lightly and began to speak in a deep voice. "Don't doubt why I am so surprised. I only tell you one thing. Do you know who caused the turmoil in the battle city a few days ago? Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Chang. Chapter 617. After everyone heard what Bing Xuanye said, they couldn't help but shake their heads at the same time. Their eyes were fixed on Bing Xuanye's body, and their faces were slightly raised. Who knows this? But according to legend, someone seems to have hatched the egg of the red-trained yellow sand beast in Tianbeizai that no one can even look at. However, it was the legendary god-level egg. Everyone in this fighting city has tried to hatch the alien egg, but no one has been able to successfully hatch it. I think it's probably just a rumor. That's right, it seems that there are just some nefarious people who deliberately spread this news. It's not worth mentioning at all, and it's not worth talking about at all. And at this moment, after hearing what everyone said, Bing Xuanye just turned his head and glanced coldly at them. His eyes were full of contempt and contempt. "Oh, stupid, unfathomable stupidity, can't you still feel it now? We can't feel the aura on his body because our alien beast level and his alien beast level are simply not the same, and the coercion on his body is just pure bloodline coercion. The bloodline coercion can suppress all of us by itself. How incredible is that kind of bloodline?" At this moment, everyone heard what Bing Xuanye said. They couldn't help but take a breath of cold air. They looked at each other like this: "You look at me, I look at you, those eyebrows." There was a complete sense of surprise between them. "What? You mean?" The people around looked at Lin Yu again at the same time. At this time, they couldn't help but take a breath. Although Lin Yu also wanted to keep a low profile, looking at the behavior of this class and given the current situation, even if I want to keep a low profile, I'm afraid I can't. So at this time, Lin Yu could only choose such a high-profile response. He just turned his head, glanced at everyone, and then nodded and smiled. Everyone's eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu, and they couldn't help but take a breath of cold air. Elder Dugu saw that the fire was almost done, so he turned his head, coughed slightly, and glanced in Lin Yu's direction. "You can sit in that seat from now on. Since someone has already introduced you, there is no need to introduce you again. Just go back to your seat." As Elder Dugu said, he pointed towards the empty seat next to Lei Yan. At this time, Lei Yan saw that Elder Dugu had arranged for Lin Yu to be with him. Even though Lei Yan already knew that Lin Yu deeply cherished the Scarlet Lian Huangsha beast, Lei Yan also heard the gossip, that is, this Ji Lian Huang sand beast was in his heart. Although the sand beast has a very advanced bloodline, its level is only at the epic level. So when Lei Yan thought about this, the smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. He turned his head and stared at Lin Yu. He seemed to be planning something, but he knew it from the looks of it. This guy definitely has no good intentions. However, Lin Yu didn't bother to pay attention to this kind of person. He walked directly to Lei Yan's side, and then he was about to continue doing this. However, at this time, Lei Yan just popped up a small flame from his fingertips. In an instant, the stool was reduced to ashes. Lei Yan was just waiting for Lin Yu to make a fool of himself, but at this time, Lin Yu seemed to have eyes on his back, hovering in the air, then turned around and glared at Lei Yan fiercely. In an instant, he was overwhelmed by the coercion on Lin Yu's body. The chair under Lei Yan's butt was instantly crushed into a ball of rotten sticks. At this time, Lin Yu had a gloomy look on his face. He stood up slowly, and then stepped on Lei Yan's chest. At this time, Lin Yu was condescending. I don't care what happened before, but after I come, if I see you as annoying as you are now, I will use my coercion to break every bone in your body bit by bit. At this time, Lin Yu was gritting his teeth and speaking every word. At this time, after Lei Yan heard what Lin Yu said, he felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. At this moment, he couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva, and there was a kind of panic in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. Meaning. After everyone saw Lin Yu like this, they instantly understood that this guy was another Lei Yan who couldn't be offended. After those people thought of this, they couldn't help but shake their heads, and then they laughed like this, looking at Lei Yan with such pity in their eyes. At this time, a layer of dense cold sweat suddenly appeared on Lei Yan's forehead, and Lei Yan's entire face instantly became ugly. At this time, Lei Yan was also frightened. He just sat on the ground blankly, not knowing what to say or do. About a quarter of an hour later, even though Elder Geng turned his back to them and was just busy writing, he coughed softly, ahem, that's about it. Small punishments and big warnings are not necessary. Don't show mercy. At this moment, Lin Yu's expression softened instantly, and then he gently helped Lei Yan up. He pinned Lei Yan with a smile on his face, and then patted Lei Yan's shoulder gently. Ha ha ha, don't mind, it's just a joke with you, I believe you won't take it to heart. Lin Yu turned his head and stared at Lei Yan, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this time, Lin Yu was sunny and handsome, just like the big boy of the Lin family. Lin Yu's eating behavior directly won the hearts of many girls in the class. Those girls looked at Lin Yu with eyes that seemed to be about to burst into stars. At this time, Lin Yu just coughed lightly, and then went to the back of the classroom to get 2 chairs, and threw one directly to Lei Yan. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 618. After Lei Yan took over the chair, he sat down directly. At this time, Lin Yu also took the chair and sat next to Lei Yan. At this moment, Lei Yan looked at the pervert in front of him, and he was naturally filled with emotion. At this time, Lei Yan didn't even dare to take a breath, and just sat next to Lin Yu, much more honest than before. At this time, Lin Yu looked at the things that Elder Dugu wrote on the blackboard and felt a little boring. These things were all very basic to him. Lin Yu just felt a little bored, and then he just lay down on the table and began to fall asleep. Everyone looked at Lin Yu with eyes full of admiration. At this time, Elder Dugu also knew that it was indeed not possible to treat a guy like Lin Yu in the same way as an ordinary student. It's just that Lin Yu is sleeping soundly like this, and he really doesn't take himself seriously. Elder Dugu just coughed lightly, and then he spoke unhurriedly. Ahem, this red-trained yellow sand beast is biased towards the earth attribute. Although all attacks with 5 elements of attributes can be used, only the earth-attributed attack is its most powerful attack. Now you can show everyone this red-trained yellow sand beast. The beast's attack method. Elder Dugu's voice came suddenly, and everyone heard it. After Elder Dugu said this, those people were all drowsy, but now they suddenly cheered up. At this time, Lin Yu was also confused by being called out by Elder Dugu, and was even a little confused for a moment. At this time, Lin Yu slowly came to the front of Elder Dugu, and then summoned the red sand beast. When everyone saw the one who stepped on Lin Yu's shoulder, only a red-trained yellow sand beast the size of an eagle instantly transformed into a roar of laughter. The red-trained yellow sand beast seemed to be a little angry, and then he directly released his pressure like this. Although this thing was very small, the pressure on him was not ordinary at all. People who can resist it? After everyone felt the coercion from the Killian yellow sand beast, they were pressed down on the desk at the same time. No one could resist it. Some people even give up treatment directly. Lin Yu just looked around at everyone, then coughed lightly and scratched his head. Ahem, cough, cough, don't mind, I hope you don't mind, this little guy is just joking with everyone. At this time, Elder Dugu drew a transparent barrier around them, and then glanced in Lin Yu's direction. Now you use the Red Sand Beast's Earth attribute attack to try to break this barrier. You must know that Elder Dugu didn't actually think that Lin Yu was very strong, but even so, because of the variable existence of the red refined yellow sand beast, he still used the barrier with all his strength. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Elder Dugu said, he just turned his head and glanced in Elder Dugu's direction, with a special smile on his lips. No, are you sure you want to break this barrier? As a teacher, Elder Dugu couldn't tolerate his majesty in front of students. So at this time, Elder Dugu nodded heavily, and then said in a deep voice. That's natural. Use your abilities as much as you want. Don't hold anything back. This is also a way for students to understand the attacks of this Earth-type beast, so that they can encounter it again in the future. Be prepared when encountering Earth attribute beasts. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Elder Dugu said, he just casually snapped his fingers, and then a blast of war wind suddenly emitted from the body of the red-trained yellow sand beast. With that ferocious and surging war, Gangfeng completely shattered the barrier set up by Elder Dugu, while the red-trained yellow sand beast just opened its mouth, and then continued lazily. Lying on Lin Yu's shoulder, it seemed that he didn't use much strength at all. When Elder Dugu saw this scene, he was shocked and dumbfounded. There was a look of disbelief between his eyebrows. He simply couldn't believe that Lin Yu could really do this. At this time, Lin Yu just scratched his head and smiled. Then he turned his head and glanced at Elder Dugu. The smile on the corner of his mouth was even brighter. It is becoming more and more obvious. Ha ha ha, I'm sorry, I just used too much force. Everyone saw the big hole in the wall. At this time, they no longer dared to despise Lin Yu in the slightest. After all, everyone could see how terrifying Lin Yu was. When Elder Dugu heard Lin Yu say this, 3 black lines instantly appeared on his forehead, and then he smiled awkwardly and scratched his head. Actually, this is mainly for demonstration. I just want to warn everyone that when dealing with Earth-attributed beasts, the energy barrier must be strong enough. This Earth-attributed attack is indeed too powerful. The powerful and strong power is the characteristic of Earth-attributed attack. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Elder Dugu said, his eyes were full of admiration. He just felt that Elder Dugu was too shameless, and the degree of shamelessness was even beyond his imagination. In fact, Lin Yu just wanted to warn Elder Dugu not to act rashly and warn Elder Dugu that he had the strength to fight him. Otherwise, once this old man tore his face, Dugu Qinghong would probably be the most uncomfortable. If it weren't for what happened yesterday, Lin Yu could not care about Dugu Qinghong's feelings. But now what should happen, what happened, and what shouldn't happen have all happened, so Lin Yu must care about Dugu Qinghong's feelings, and sometimes even wrong himself. Now Lin Yu could only shock Elder Dugu and make him realize that his power was beyond his imagination. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 619. Suyuyan, who was originally on the school playground, suddenly saw a war gust flying above her head. The destructive power of the war gust flew directly towards the playground and struck like this. It was the first-grade students who were training on the playground. If those students were hit by this war front, not only the students but also the teacher would be killed on the spot. At this time, Suyuyan was also furious, and then she suddenly dodged and came to the front of the war. She formed a mysterious mark with her hands, and then immediately in front of the war wind, suddenly a barrier appeared. Suyuyan gritted her teeth, clenched her fists, and resisted with all her strength. The cold aura on her body was released without reservation at this moment. At this time, Suyuyan's face was slightly pale. After a while, she only felt a surge in her chest. However, at this time, the sharp edge of the war was getting smaller and smaller, and she was still able to block it without any danger. Come down. However, at the beginning, Lin Yu was afraid of making too much noise, so he just controlled the red-trained yellow sand beast and used 80% of his power. If Suyuyan heard this news, she would probably be so angry that she would vomit blood and die. After all, you must know that this war Gangfeng first shattered Elder Dugu's energy barrier, and then if he encountered an ordinary person with such power, he would probably be smashed into dregs. Even for Amelia Sunao, the situation was not easy. She stood there for nearly a quarter of an hour before she finally recovered. At this time, Suyuyan was also furious. At this time, he clenched his fists and gritted his teeth, and then glanced over his head like this. In fact, Suyuyan can generally tell which class did such a thing even without looking at it. After all, in the entire combat academy, except for the very abnormal class led by Elder Dugu, there is no one who can do such a thing. Except, I'm afraid no one else can do this. So at this time, Suyuyan rushed towards the upstairs angrily. At this time, Elder Dugu seemed to hear a rapid sound of high heels hitting the ground. After everyone heard this sound, they couldn't help but gasp at the same time, and their eyes were fixed on Lin Yu. At this time, Lin Yu, the instigator, saw everyone looking at him like this. He couldn't help coughing lightly at that time, and then turned his head and glanced at everyone. Ahem, what's the problem? Why are you looking at me like this? Lin Yu just said in a low voice. At this time, Elder Dugu looked at Lin Yu with a look of gloating, and then spoke leisurely. Do you still remember our dean? Friendly reminder, the enemy has 3 seconds to reach the battlefield. At this time, the students in the class were also very cooperative and began to chant silently. 3, 2, 1. At this moment, the door of the room was suddenly pushed open, and then a beautiful figure suddenly appeared in front of everyone. Although this figure was extremely beautiful, when everyone saw this figure, they just felt chills on their backs and numb scalps. They had no intention of appreciating it at all. Of course, they were not in the mood to appreciate it. Suyuyan came to the front of Elder Dugu quietly, then directly pinched her waist with both hands, and then said in a cold voice. Elder Dugu, what happened just now? Do you know that if I hadn't reacted in time to stop that boulder and the war wind, I'm afraid how many classmates would have been killed or injured by now? At this time, Lin Yu felt as if his ears were about to explode. At this time, he finally understood why those classmates just looked at him with such schadenfreude. At this time, Elder Dugu also looked aggrieved. You can't blame me for this, it's not my fault at all, it's all because of this kid. After Elder Dugu finished speaking, he pointed at Lin Yu. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Elder Dugu said, his heart felt as if 10,000 grass and mud horses were galloping past. Lin Yu's face turned slightly ugly, and then he forced a smile towards Suyuyan. Master Dean, you should also know that I only hatched this red-trained yellow sand beast just now, so I have no way to fully control the red-trained yellow sand beast. I hope you can understand. At this time, Suyuyan walked towards Lin Yu with a smile on her face, as if she was a harmless little white rabbit. But if someone really had this illusion, I'm afraid that person would be in trouble soon. After seeing Suyuyan like this, Lin Yu thought that his explanation had passed the test, and he was secretly happy in his heart. But when Suyuyan came to Lin Yu, she directly grabbed Lin Yu's ear and rotated it 360 degrees. At this time, Lin Yu also gasped in pain. Everyone in the class after seeing this scene, I couldn't bear to look at it. Suyuyan said to Lin Yu with a smile, You just told me that you can't control the red striped yellow sand beast, right? If you can't, then I will find a way to help you control it. What do you say? Now Lin Yu can be said to be in a difficult situation, so at this moment he can only be forced to agree. After Suyuyan heard Lin Yu's agreement, her heart suddenly sucked in, and then she smiled. Okay, in this case, come to me on the weekend, come to the dean's office. After Suyuyan finished speaking, she turned and left. At this time, everyone looked at Lin Yu and the others with sympathetic eyes. When they looked at Lin Yu, they just had a little more sympathy, and then they couldn't help but shake their heads slightly. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu felt that everyone's eyes seemed a little strange. At this time, Lin Yu also looked at them and his face was slightly raised. At this time, Lin Yu also took a deep breath. What's the matter? Why do you look at me like this? Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 620. At this time, Elder Dugu slowly walked to Lin Yu's side, and then gently patted Lin Yu's shoulder. The smile on the corner of his mouth was even more obvious. Actually, it's not a big deal, but I'm afraid your kid is going to be miserable. Elder Dugu said softly, and the smile at the corner of his mouth was even more obvious. After Lin Yu heard what Elder Dugu said, he was stunned on the spot. At this time, Lin Yu stared directly at Elder Dugu, and his face was slightly raised. Elder Dugu, what do you mean by this? Why can't I understand? At this time, Lin Yu also had some bad premonitions in his heart. Of course, he could understand that there must be something wrong with Elder Dugu acting like this. After all, this old guy was disrespectful and extremely problematic. After waiting for a while, Elder Dugu just waved his hand casually. It's nothing, nothing. A beautiful woman is giving you tutoring. Aren't you happy? And as a friendly reminder, you'd better not have any ideas about that woman, otherwise you will definitely regret it. Elder Dugu stared at Lin Yu with a smile on his face, a bit of amusement in his eyes. At this time, Lin Yu also took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. Elder Dugu, I asked you if you could explain this matter more clearly. Lin Yu almost said this through gritted teeth, because at this time, the bad premonition in his heart began to be particularly strong. After waiting for a while, Elder Dugu couldn't help but laugh like this, and then the whole class also laughed. Lin Yu was naturally confused, and he looked like he didn't know what was going on. Immediately afterwards, Lin Yu also knew that if he wanted to ask Elder Dugu what was going on, he might not be able to figure it out. So at this time, Lin Yu slowly walked to his seat. Naturally, he was very depressed at this moment. At this moment, Lei Yan turned around and glanced at Lin Yu. Lei Yan seemed to have something to say to him. Lin Yu turned his head and glanced at Lei Yan, and then spoke softly. If you have anything to say, just say it. Lei Yan gritted his teeth, then summoned up great courage and began to talk to Lin Yu about Suyuyan. Dean Su is indeed a ruthless person. According to legend, there was a junior but extremely talented student who accidentally said a few words that offended Dean Su behind her back, and then he was directly raped. He has been in the hospital for half a year, and his family is also very powerful, but no one dares to trouble Dean Su, so he can only suffer the consequences of being dumb. After Lin Yu heard what Lei Yan said, he nodded slightly, and then patted Lei Yan on the shoulder. Okay, I understand. In fact, although Lei Yan is said to have a bad temper and likes to do pranks, in fact he is not bad in nature. For example, in this matter, he is still reminding Lin Yu that at least he does not mean to harm Lin Yu. Such a person Lin Yu actually didn't hate it. When Suyuyan left the classroom, there was a hint of evil in the corner of her mouth, and the playfulness in her eyes began to become more and more obvious. It's interesting. It's really interesting. Why is this little guy so unpredictable to me? What is the identity of this little guy? Suyuyan half closed her eyes, but after pondering for a moment, her expression slightly raised. After waiting for a while, a frosty woman walked towards him. There was no color on that woman's face, and her expression seemed to be frozen. There was only one expression forever. After Suyuyan saw the person coming, the smile on her lips became even more obvious, and she walked directly towards the woman. But after seeing Amelia Su, the woman's face was obviously a little moved, and her expression became a little solid. At this time, Suyuyan was so quiet and walked straight towards the woman. The smile on the corner of her mouth was even more interesting. Yeleng Shuang, long time no see. After Yeleng Shuang heard what Suyuyan said, she raised her head and glanced towards Suyuyan. A bit of complexity flashed in her eyes, and then she nodded slightly. Long time no see, what do you want? Yeleng Shuang's face is as icy as the name suggests. There is not much expression on her face, and her eyes are full of indifference. She looks like a fairy who has strayed into the mortal world. At this time, after Suyuyan heard what Yeleng Shuang said, a smile appeared on the corner of her mouth, and then she slowly walked towards Yeleng Shuang. Actually, it's not a big deal. I just have a very interesting student and I want to ask you to help me. If the two of us have time, we can go together and give the student a good lesson, no? Suyuyan just whispered like this, the smile at the corner of her mouth began to become gradually obvious, and her eyes were fixed on Suyuyan. For some reason, Yeleng Shuang always felt that something was wrong with Suyuyan. Deliberately, as if digging a hole for himself, Yeleng Shuang glanced at Suyuyan, then coughed lightly, and then waved his hand casually, with a smile on his face. Forget it, I don't have time on the weekend. After Yeleng Shuang finished speaking, he was about to turn around and leave, but before Yeleng Shuang left, Suyuyan said softly. If I say that the little guy just hatched the red-banded yellow sand beast, I wonder if you would be interested. Suyuyan said softly. After hearing what Suyuyan said, Yeleng Shuang's expression became a little surprised. He turned his head and stared at Suyuyan, with a look of disbelief flashing in his eyes and eyebrows. What did you say? Are you telling the truth? At this time, Yeleng Shuang turned his head and stared at Suyuyan, his face slightly condensed, and his eyebrows were full of disbelief.